A question that is often raised is, why was Jesus baptized? Why did Jesus, who was created without sin, why did he have to be baptized by John? Well, one reason is that because he wanted to show us the way to a deeper relationship with the Father. He wanted to show us a way to a deeper relationship in our faith. And so by Jesus humbling himself, and he did humble himself because he was baptized by John the Baptist. And really, it was kind of a very remarkable moment there because John himself had recognized, one greater than I is going to come. And then he had the honor and the privilege of baptizing Jesus there in the Jordan. So it kind of is a very humbling moment for Jesus, a very humbling moment. He was probably about 30 years old at that point. And so it was also a way for him to begin his public ministry. It was for him to go from a relative life of obscurity, living in Nazareth in a quiet way as the carpenter's son, to going to begin his public ministry where he would go and heal the sick, free the captive, proclaim liberty, and have a whole new order for the world. So for Jesus, no, he did not have to be baptized because he did not have original sin. And that is what baptism really accomplishes for us. It washes away original sin. Original sin being that mark that each one of us has, that we have inherited as human beings. Original sin is when we have inherited a mark because of the fact that we are sons and daughters really of Adam and Eve. Because of our humanity, it is an inclination to do evil. When we are baptized, we now have an option. We now have the ability to now have an option of really working towards a deeper relationship with God. So it gives us that special option, that ability to make good and holy decisions. In the gift of baptism, we become a part of God's family. And for many years, for centuries, people would celebrate the anniversary of their baptism. It's very easy to do when we're only baptized, let's say at the Easter Vigil, but we do baptisms all year long. So we honor that gift of baptism by the fact that when a child is born into a family, they're born into your human family. When they are reborn in baptism, they're born into our Christian family, into God's family. And just as in the baptism of Jesus, he was appointed or kind of anointed, he was called, he was identified as the Son of God, in that same way, when we are baptized, we are identified as sons and daughters of God, that we are part of God the Father's family. And it's beautiful because we have a practice of infant baptism. And so for us as Catholic Christians, we have the ability to be baptized as a child, which means most likely someone made that decision for us. Someone made the decision for us to go through that gift of baptism and stood up for us as a witness that they would raise us in the practice of the faith. But at some point, if you're over the age of 7, you can make that decision more yourself. Someone still stands up for you, but at the age of 7, you have to go through a little bit more instruction. So we have infant baptism. We encourage families to have their children baptized as infants. But once a child is the age of 7 supposedly is the age of reason. Now, if you have a 7-year-old, you're probably going to argue with me about that they're anything but reasonable. But it is the age where we can start understanding concepts, where we can start maybe understanding how to learn. And the learning process has a whole different way about it. Another question that comes up sometimes is, well, what if a child, something happens to the child before they're baptized? Because really for many of us, we were probably baptized in the first couple of weeks of our life. I was about 3 weeks old, and we don't really have a time on it. Again, up to the age of 7, the parents can just come to the class and speak for the child. After that, the child goes through a little more formal instruction. But what happens, and there was a time where there was this thought process, and it was never an official teaching of the church, of this place called limbo. Like, oh, if you're not baptized, and if a child passes away before they're baptized, oh, they're going to go to this place called limbo, which is an awful kind of thought. And I don't know where it came from, but we kind of disputed that, and we put that to rest a number of years ago. That a child is created with God and their parents as co-creators, and so if something happens to them, the child is created out of great love. God's not going to banish a baby, to some place called limbo. Like, that's just an awful kind of thought when you think about that. So, no, what he rather does, he calls the children to himself. He said, let the little children come to me. So if you've had the pain, let's say, of losing a child around the time of birth or before birth or whatnot, that soul is with God. And just take a lot of comfort in that God has called that child to be there with him in the kingdom of heaven. And your family has a little angel there just waiting for you. So there's some comfort that we can take in knowing that. So today, as we celebrate the baptism of Jesus, it's a good opportunity for us to think about our own baptism. Who made the decision for you to be baptized? If you don't know, well, maybe find that out. Maybe it's in your baby book, unless you're the third child, and it's not written in there, because once you're the third child, they've forgotten about you. But maybe it's written there. Why did they have you baptized? Why did your parents have you baptized, or somebody else make that decision? Why would you want to have your grandchildren baptized, or your children? Why did you say yes to that? When we are baptized, we're kind of giving a great gift, and we give children a lot of gifts in their whole lifetime, most of which they never remember. A lot of thought is put into place about, what should I get a child for their birthday or for Christmas? And years later, you just don't really remember those things. But what we do remember is the example that was given to us, most specifically the example of faith. The beauty of the example of faith that God gives to each one of us and our parents give to us. So when you have your child baptized, you're giving them a gift. You're giving them the opportunity to have a whole lifetime with God. That at different times in their life, God will be present because you're introducing them to the life of the sacraments. This is an introduction. I mentioned baptism makes us a part of God's family. The Eucharist, we receive Jesus the Son. And in confirmation, we receive the Holy Spirit. So we have this beautiful fullness of a life with God, a life with the Trinity. But just as Jesus, when he was baptized, suddenly became a public person, my friends, by our baptism, each one of us is now a public person. In a public way, we professed the faith. By coming to Mass, by being a part of the church, we are publicly stating that we have the title, the identification of a son or daughter of God, that we are a part of God's family. And so today really is a day also for us to reflect upon our own baptism and think of how do we live that out? How are we living out that baptismal call? When we profess our faith here at Mass every Sunday, when every single day we wake up, we can realize that baptism was not just a one-time event, kind of like a wedding. A wedding is not just a one-time event. I knew a couple that was married 50 years, and every time the husband was asked how long he was married, he said he was married for one day. And the wife would kick him under the table and elbow him and say, "Why do you always tell people you're married for just one day?" And he said to her, "Every day, honey, when I wake up, I recommit myself to you." It's the same thing with baptism. Every day, we recommit ourselves to God. Every single day. Marriage is not a one-time event. Baptism is not a one-time event. Yes, we're baptized just once. We're married once. We have a lifetime with our spouse. But you know what? It's every single day we live that out. So today, as a public person, as a public Catholic Christian, I would just ask you to consider and to think of how are you living out that baptismal call in the example of Christ, who also shared in that gift of baptism, of being a son of God. In that same way, we are also his sons and his daughters.